Hi, everyone. Welcome to our Substack show, which we're doing once a week and are going to try to do even more. And of course, I'm very excited because I love to talk to Steve, whether we're on Substack or we're just chewing the fat over the phone or grabbing a cup of coffee or something stronger. I wanted to say Steve is obviously co-founder of the Lincoln Project, a political strategist, founder of The Warning, was once a Republican. He and I met when he was running the John McCain presidential campaign in 2008. We bonded over Sarah Palin, which we don't.
Hold on 1 second, Katie. I have my black lab Tucker was crying at the door.
Aw, oh,
He wants in, Katie.
can you show us Tucker real quick?
I can't. He's walked away here
Oh,
to get on his couch.
did you name him after Tucker Carlson?
I did not. I did not. He was a refugee, if you will, from seeing eye dog school. He flunked out. So I
Oh,
got him. I got him when he was 10 months old, but he's 14 now.
oh, wow.
Pretty tough.
14,
Yeah,
14 years old?
14-year-old black lab, great dog.
Oh, wow. Well, listen, Steve, as I said, it's always great to see you. So much to talk about. Since you were late and kind of forgot about me, you were on a call. We're going to just jam it in real quickly. And I really feel like we have to start with the Middle East because, as you know, President Trump was on the cover of Time magazine. It's being heralded in many quarters by this tremendous accomplishment. On the other hand, I was listening to Rick Stengel say someplace that most diplomats underpromise and overdeliver. And he felt that Donald Trump was overpromising, and the fear is he's going to underdeliver, which I thought was a pretty succinct way of saying the proof, the devil's in the details, and the proof will be in the pudding, if you will. So I'm just curious to hear your perspective on this big Mideast victory lap that President Trump was taking earlier this week.
It's extraordinary that in the aftermath of a war that has rubbleized a geography, killed at least 60,000 people inside of it, and caused so much trauma in Israel, that in the end, I guess the war, well, it was about Trump, right? And if you look at the magazine covers and you read the pronouncements, what was the war about? It was a victory for Donald. And it's obscene. I could show you a Life magazine from 1946, incidentally, inside of that Life magazine, that has the Palestinian on the cover. And inside the centerfold shows Jerusalem. And inside that magazine is the photograph of all the top tier A Nazis laid out in their caskets after they got hung. That peace in the Middle East is not a function of Donald's ego. And anybody who thinks that a durable peace will be the fruit of a corrupt commercial transaction between Donald and all of these Arab thugs in a Bitcoin transaction has rocks in their head.
Well, talk to me more about calling it a corrupt commercial transaction. Tell me why you're characterizing it as
Well,
that.
that's what the Abraham courts, in essence, were, that discounted the presence of the Palestinians at all. In the end, there's 7.5 million Palestinians and there's 7.5 million Jews in a tight geographic proximity with a 2 millennia contestation over the land. And the notion that this will be figured out in Riyadh or in Dubai or by Jared Kushner and Steve Witkoff in either of those places is absurd. And so there is a temporary ceasefire. Hamas emerged from underground and began executing all of its competitors. We haven't really seen what Gaza looks like inside, but the issue's not about Trump. And the egotism and the celebration, and I can explain the Time magazine cover. It's owned by another billionaire, Mark Benioff. He's quieter, and he didn't make the first round cut. He didn't make it into the front row for the inauguration. But whether it's Ellison at CBS, whether it's Bob Iger at ABC, what the American people are served is a thin gruel that's dressed up as news. There is no independence in these companies. There is no integrity in the morning editorial meeting. And so this is politics. And the politics dictate if you are at a giant corporation that owns a news division, that you celebrate Trump. And that's why Trump is being celebrated, because not on the basis of a real achievement, but on the basis of the corporate strategy, which is now's the time to celebrate him at the proverbial point of a gun. And that's what's happening.
But it's not just the media, is it, Steve? I mean, I talked to many people, even Andrew Ross Sorkin was like, he's doing this in some terrible things, but then I look at what he has done in the Mideast, and I find just anecdotally, a lot of people are, Steve, giving him credit for at least, you know, bringing a temporary end to the war and laying out some kind of plan. I'm not saying I am, I'm just hearing it. And so I know
I
what you're saying about
I
these media
I I,
entities.
I think maybe Andrew Ross Sorkin then knows a lot more about economics than he does the Middle East. And I'll say that. I mean, I say that with no malice. Maybe he doesn't understand anything about the Middle East. The reality is that Bibi Netanyahu profoundly divided Israeli society. And he projected the type of weakness that's a provocation. And Hamas was provoked by the division and the weakness, and they attacked. And they slaughtered 1,200 kids who went to a concert. And Israel went to war for 2 years. And Netanyahu is opposed by about two-thirds of his country.
Hmm.
And his political calculation has been that so long as the war goes on, I get to stay as prime minister. And he so closely tied himself to Donald Trump that he put himself into the position that Trump owns him. And what Donald Trump appreciates is that inside his MAGA base, there is a tremendous schism. There are people who don't understand why we're bailing out Argentinian farmers when American farmers have jumped to the head of the suicide list because the soybean market has collapsed. And there's a big part of his political coalition that is sick of the war. Marjorie Taylor Greene understands and represents that position. And so Trump gave an order to Netanyahu because Trump is in a position to give an order to exactly one person on the planet. And his name is Bibi Netanyahu. And he stopped the bombing. But I just wonder if I think about that Life magazine with the Palestinian on the cover, wonder what happened to that man's grandchildren and his great grandchildren. I wonder how many terrorists have been produced out of the rubble in Gaza. That what came out of this is peace, and the people who pronounce it work on CNBC. No,
Steve, I found watching that speech he gave at the Knesset fascinating. Um, and even that part where he was saying they should pardon Bibi Netanyahu. Do you remember that part?
Yeah.
It was really, I mean, and it felt like everyone in the Knesset he had them eating out of the palm of his hand.
Israel will rue the day that it has yoked itself in this country to Donald Trump. There is nothing that the state of Israel could ever have done that will undermine its security more than by becoming a partisan cause in the United States and celebrating Donald Trump as Cyrus the Great. And
You don't think
Bibi Netanyahu accomplished that. And I'm somebody who's a converted Jew, who's married to a Jewish family, and the idea that in the Jewish diaspora around the world that Donald Trump is a hero, or that the peace is durable, or that Israeli security hasn't been compromised by the yoking of Israel to MAGA, I think is delusional.
that you mentioned a durable peace. I mean, already, as you said earlier, there's been signs Hamas is executing its rival. It's reportedly Israel has attacked Palestinians, the released Palestinians returning to their homes. This 20-point deal and this council that's going to oversee Gaza with Tony Blair and Donald Trump in charge. I mean, talk about your skepticism about the durability of this whole thing.
It was as if it was architected by Meatloaf on The Apprentice. I'm very serious about this. It is not real. And it is not real in the way that it is not real that Portland is at war or that Chicago is at war or that the economy is doing great. It is not real.
I wondered if you could talk a little bit about this chasm in MAGA land, I guess, with Tucker Carlson and Candace Owen and Megyn Kelly. And I guess Michelle Goldberg wrote about it, about kind of, and ostensibly that Charlie Kirk was starting to pull away from Israel. Can you tell us kind of all the machinations that are going inside MAGA land that are focused on Israel?
Yes. Let me well, let me start. Well, the place to start with that directly to that question is Candace Owens and Tucker Carlson are anti-Semites, raging anti-Semites. Tucker Carlson's a person who's had people on his show that hold the position that Winston Churchill is the great villain of the Second World War and that Adolf Hitler is misunderstood. And you see the sickness inside MAGA, the text between all of these young Republicans.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you about that.
This isn't the exception. This is the tip of the iceberg.
In fact, just
And
so we tell everyone, in case they haven't seen this Politico story, basically there were I guess, tons of texts over what you guys the past 7 months or so that were were leaked to Politico with the most sort of hateful, anti-Semitic, racist, nasty comments, and somebody even saying, "Oh, we're screwed if these ever got leaked." And it turned out these were all sort of young Republicans, right? They were from Kansas and New York and all these different places. And I think it was what you're saying about the culture inside the GOP. It was 7 months that these had been exchange and then they leaked. So I just wanted to give people context. But when you saw those texts, Steve, I imagine you weren't that surprised.
No, I mean, it's the least surprising thing ever. I mean, these are the children of Trump. This is 10 years of marination in this cancer is what it is. Um, I don't know why anybody would pay attention to anything that Candace Owens says. But the Daily Beast covers every word she says every day. And so the worst of the worst are covered as culturally relevant, and our politics shines a light on these sick people in our culture. And I guess the reason that that's part of the political coverage is it speaks to the sickness in our culture. I think Megyn Kelly is in a different category than these people. But she is part of a group that were, and I put Barry Weiss in this, although it's a little bit different.
That Barry Weiss being the new head of CBS News.
Very famously resigned from the New York Times, and I don't discount at all the misery of her experience at the New York Times, and I believe she was bullied and treated terribly and abused by the woke newsroom, as she describes it. And it so damaged her and her judgment that, honest to God, she looks around the world and she thinks that the great crisis is Greta Thunberg, not the American fascist movement. Megyn Kelly, well, I think Roger Ailes took one look at Megyn and said, get her in the elevator up to my office. And Megyn Kelly comes up through the Fox network. Megyn Kelly, though, doesn't dream of being Roger's girl at Fox. She has bigger aspirations. She wants your job. And so Megyn Kelly makes it. And Megyn Kelly's on a big network, on a daytime show. And she lasted a couple months before they wrote her a check and said, Megyn, here's $50 million.
I think it was
Go away.
69. I think it was 69 million, but go
Uh,
on.
It was here's $70 million. Just go away. Go away. This didn't work. And I think the rage and the failure and the rejection of that deformed her inside and has yoked her to this cause that denigrated her. And I think psychologically, it's a very important thing to appreciate about American politics. The leaders of the Democratic Party never stop judging the American voter. And primarily, the judgment is the voter worthy of us? And in most instances, the answer to the question is no. The voter is racist. The voter is this. And if a Democrat loses, it's because they weren't good enough, right, for the low voter. MAGA is different. There's only one requirement for membership. Trump's the leader. And the leader will never, ever judge you. When these young Republicans are called out talking about black people as monkeys, talking about let's gas the Jews, let's do all of this, does J.D. Vance go out and condemn it? He defends it by pointing out, hey, this guy running for attorney general in Virginia said this, and therefore this is okay. Don't worry about it. You'll never be judged. You're one of us, MAGA forever. And so when you think about these little Eichmanns, you have to come back to bring it full circle when you read those texts, because it validates what Matthew Dowd was fired for. Violent ideas, hateful ideas,
And speech.
right? Lead to hateful words, lead to hateful actions. And this is a central lesson of history over and over and over again, whether
I
it's in Rwanda, whether it's in Nazi Germany, or whether it's in 2020's America.
I interviewed Matthew Dowd here on Substack after he was fired, and I was really surprised at MSNBC for doing that. And then I don't know, Steve, if we talked about it, and then Comcast sending a letter to its employees on top of that, basically saying the whole Charlie Kirk thing was
Obscene,
it was what?
obscene.
I mean, listen, I think it was just such a head scratcher because nobody seemed to know. I mean, I think they were trying to cover it and they needed to cover it as a political violence, and it needed to be condemned. But I mean, now didn't they have yesterday was National Charlie Kirk Day or whatever, and his wife, his widow, got the Presidential Medal of Freedom. Uh, the person he was when he was alive was totally suppressed in so many different places. Even Ezra Klein said he did politics the right way. It was a very strange thing to witness, and the way he was deified and canonized is still it's just gross.
Sure is.
Let me ask you a little bit about the Democrats. We're going to be talking to Jacob Soboroff because he's been covering these ICE raids, and there's been so many incidents. And he's been in Chicago, and I want him to tell us what's going on the ground there because it's hard to keep up with all the outrageous things that are happening on American streets. But um, the government shutdown. Of course, you've got the Democratic narrative, you've got the Republican narrative. And I'm curious how you see, as a strategist, how you see this kind of landing in America. Is it just whoever side you're on, you're believing?
Well, listen, I think that there's a lot of people who have argued with a lot of passion and intensity about things that don't deserve a lot of passion and intensity, right? It's been over the last 20 years, a lot of denunciation about who's a good American on the basis of what number in the tax code they think should be the highest marginal rate, right? The Democrats, for the record, were 39% and the Bush Republicans were 35%. That's the big difference. That's not what we're talking about here. And so the idea that we're going to have masked federal agents running wild, assaulting American citizens, the Save America movement, which I'm a member of, we have deployed Liberty vans in Chicago where we have camera crews, we have priests, chaplains, we have lawyers, we have veterans aboard, and we caught ICE attacking an American citizen yesterday on camera. And you see that ICE agent is lacking discipline. You see these guys in their videos, the constant profanity, the fumbling with the weapons. They're ill-trained thugs that should not be operating. And so when you look at what's happening in the country right now, 20 years from now, are we going to look back in October of 2025 and say there was a great healthcare crisis? The Obamacare subsidies were going to go away? That's not the crisis at hand. The crisis at hand is a mass man crisis. And I want to say something to everyone who's listening to the question you asked. Politics is tough. It's tough business, and there's a lot at stake. Donald Trump and the Obama health care premiums is something that falls on them and their voters. The position of the Democratic Party right now is functionally to bail out MAGA on an issue that can destroy the autocratic movement. And MAGA, Trump, no matter what, they have to fold on the question of these healthcare premiums because they can't survive it. And yet, in the game of chicken, the Democrats will be the ones who fold here. And two, when they do, all of the leverage will be gone, as it was in March when Chuck Schumer did what he did then, for Democrats to go out and to demand the masked agents stop snatching people off the street. If you look at what's happening in the country right now, what would you shut the government down for and hold the line about? It's over that. It's over the abuse of the army in the cities with weapons pointed at the people. The ballot box is the right place to deal with the issue of the healthcare premiums. And by the way, if Donald Trump and MAGA bankrupt half the country that doesn't have $400 available, the one group of people who should be most disinterested about helping them are the leaders of the Democratic Party, who can't win an election against these people. And that's a very serious thing. So no, the Democratic strategy to me does not make sense. It looks like it was manufactured by the type of people that think Ezra Klein is a genius, that get up, and I mean this, right? Like that lack common sense. Like Charlie Kirk did not do it the right way. And the Democratic Party is filled with people like Ezra Klein and
Well,
and people who hail him as a strategic genius. And there's story after story. And the price of this is we're losing the country.
well, let me ask you a couple questions that people watching this is. One, why do you think the Democrats are going to fold? And B, someone just mentioned Schumer saying it's a wet noodle strategy. And my final question in the series of three is, how can the Democrats reinvent themselves, reinvigorate the party, be, a better foe against what's happening in this country? So why don't you start first? Why do you think
There,
the
there,
Democrats are going
there's
to fold?
well, because past is prologue, and they don't have a position that they're able to maintain. I don't think over the long run. So we'll see. They just don't have the stomach for the fight in the races. And for I could talk about this for an hour, but they're going to fold. It will not be MAGA that folds here. And when they do fold, and they will, um, there will be no leverage to make a demand that the most abusive stuff stop. Here's the number two piece. Everything that has happened right through this second in this country, and I'm not looking for a certificate, a ribbon, or a trophy, but I said exactly what would happen. And I said it for the first time in very early 2022. When I've talked about the disaster of Joe Biden in 2024, in 2025, it has not been to kick the shit out of people for the decisions they made that we can't do anything about. The reason has been to prepare people to comprehend the next decisions that have to be made that we can still make. And that has to do with Chuck Schumer. There are 45 Democratic senators, and it doesn't matter what any of them say about any issue at any moment, because the collective judgment of that group of people is a farce. in October of 2025. Because at the front of that room is Chuck Schumer. And he's not a capable man. He's not competent to the moment. And the one thing that surely has to really lift the spirits of MAGA every hour of every day is the people that face off across. And knowing that they never go away, they never leave. And so would the country be better off with the Democratic Party led by John Ossoff? Of course. Is Hakeem Jeffries up to the job? Of course not. And so the first requirement of being a good Democrat in America in the fascist era is to make believe and pretend. And just like the good MAGAs line up behind their leaders, the good Democrats line up behind their leaders. The difference is the MAGA leaders are wolves and the Democratic leaders are sheep. And the Democratic voters are lemmings and the MAGA voters are little Nazis and predators. And you have a vast middle of the country that is betwixt and between the appeasers and the predators. And here we are. You have two profoundly corrupt institutions. And anybody who says, oh, no, the Democratic Party's not corrupt. Well, it's corrupt enough to have lost an election 2 out of 3 to MAGA.
Corrupt or ineffective? Corrupt or ineffective, Steve?
It is corrupt. It's ineffective. When the attorney general candidate nominee in Virginia is talking about killing the kids of the Republican speaker, I would argue that that's corrupt. That a Menendez, when Chuck Schumer comes out and says, no, he was a faithful servant to the people of New Jersey, I would say that it's even deeper than corrupt. It's a rot. It's a rot. And I'm just waiting, right, for the next shout down by all these people in Washington, right, when the next unelectable candidate is put forward and the demand that everybody get in line. Because I know that there is at least enough of us, meaning me, people like me. Maybe we are 8% of the country, right? 9%. But I know that there is enough that we are not getting on board with the suicide charge of the next Democratic candidate. I would rather lose the election to J.D. Vance. Let's all commit a virtuous suicide as a nation. And we can find one candidate out there. Maybe they'll get 7% of the vote, but they won't be a spoiler. They can stand for the American proposition. And they can talk about democracy, and they can talk about liberty, and they can talk about the ideas and the ideals of the country. And though we will lose, those ideas can be packaged with a ribbon, put around them as a historical testament and memory for who we are when some better generation in the future comes along that has the wherewithal to unwind this and to stop it, to repudiate it, and to raise up something better in its place. That's what I'm for. Because there's no way I'm getting back on board behind the people that are the architects of this disaster that brought us Donald Trump. And the people that brought us Donald Trump are the people around Chuck Schumer and the people around Joe Biden and the people around Kamala Harris. That's who did it.
Steve, I got to go talk to Jacob Soboroff because he's got a out at 6, but I always love talking to you. Let's do it again soon. Can we?
Absolutely. Of course. And I will be on time.
Yeah. Steve was on a phone call and lost track of time, which
I did.
like a dagger in my heart. But thank you for coming, even though you were a bit late. And yeah, we got a lot more to talk about. I hope that there's some other alternative route than the one you just described. But that's for another time.
We cannot be hostages on both sides, right? We're hostages by one party and the other.
Love you. Got to go. All right. I'll talk to you soon. All right. Bye, Steve. Bye. Okay. Now we got Jacob coming, everybody. He has been patiently waiting. I didn't want to cut. Okay, sorry. Scroll up. See here. Yeah. There you which is there. Oh, hold on. Sorry, Fazio. Sorry. That's okay. Here. Here we go. All right, here comes Jacob. I wanted to find out. He's been covering these ICE raids all over the country. Uh, he's going to kill me because I'm late to get to him, but Steve was late. Jacob, so sorry. Steve Schmidt would
How
not
cool
stop
is this?
talking, and he has a lot of interesting things to say. I love Steve, but we were behind because he was on a phone call and lost track of time. So I
Oh,
apologize.
stop.
Let,
This
let-
is this is my first live Substack live. It's cool.
I can't believe this is your first Substack Live. Wow, I'm very honored that you're doing it with me. Jacob, I know you don't have a ton of time, but
Don't worry about it.
you've done an incredible job between everything else you're doing, covering these ICE raids. You've been in Chicago. I guess you were in LA as well, New York. Just give us a quick overview, and then I want you to share with us some of the stories that are happening all over the country that we're seeing in bits and pieces on social media, but I don't think many people or everyone understands the full breadth of what is happening out on American streets.
Yeah, and I think that that's why I'm so glad we're doing this actually, because I think that once people sort of understand fully what the Trump administration is doing and how it is not what they said they were going to be doing, which is going after the worst of the worst, it puts us all in an entirely different perspective. And so, big picture is that they are doing exactly what they promised. I reported from the floor of the Republican convention when they said they were going to carry out the largest mass deportation effort in American history. And you can't carry out mass deportations without deporting non-criminals, people who are just here undocumented and in many cases have lived their entire lives here.
Or are U.S. citizens, right?
Well, it's such a good point. They modeled this after an 1954 operation from Dwight D. Eisenhower with the name that is so racist. I'm not going to say it, but it deported 1 million Mexicans, many of whom who had come here legally through the Bracero program, the work program, and many Mexican Americans as well. And that's the model that they used for creating the largest mass deportation program in American history. Um, and so, when I was on the floor of the convention, they held up those signs, mass deportation now. And what is mass deportation? Because it's not possible to deport. If you want to break the record of Dwight D. Eisenhower and Barack Obama, who deported a lot of people, more people than any president, you have to deport everyday civilians. They might be undocumented, but they're here with having committed no other crime than just being here and being present in the country.
And many of them are the process of becoming U.S. citizens, right?
Oh
They're in
man,
court hearings. They're
you've seen
doing
that.
it
I
the
was there
right
too.
way.
I went to 26 Federal Plaza in downtown Manhattan, and I watched them just picking people off, like shooting fish in a barrel, and who are trying to, as you said, Katie, like do things the right way. And so there's some version of this now playing out on cities all across the country. And in LA, it's in Home Depot parking lots and people at fruit stands and vendors of food and flower sellers. Um, in Chicago, where I was last week, it's a 53-year-old mother walking down the street with a little pink backpack and a sweater and her hair in a ponytail because it was cold, Marcella, who was just going to buy meat for a stew to cook dinner for her family. And she gets rolled up on by multiple vehicles, maybe a dozen agents, masked, long rifles, tactical gear, and a crew from DHS filming the video on a high definition camera because that's what they're trying to do. They're making these propaganda videos out of it to try to make it look like um, the streets are lawless. And I'm not saying there's not crime in Chicago or crime in LA or crime in these places. But is it undocumented immigrant crime? Is it crime that can't be solved by local law enforcement or grants from the federal government like the mayors and the governors of these places are asking for? And instead you get Trump threatening to arrest J.B. Pritzker or Gavin Newsom or all these local elected officials, by the way, in blue states and in blue cities, for sticking up for their people. And not because there's some grand conspiracy to make undocumented people U.S. citizens to vote or all the other wacky crap that you hear online, but because they care about the humanity of the people that are being rounded up and the families that are being separated. And to me, until the country understands that, this is going to continue. But I'm very eager to see what happens on Saturday at the No King's Day protests, because that's what stopped family separation was widespread outrage over the policy. We've seen it before. We've seen him cave in the face of outrage, and I do think if people fully understand what's happening, there were 7,000 people that protested spontaneously in Chicago when I was there one night. I think it could happen again that they stop him from doing this.
Talk a little bit about what you're seeing with the National Guard, because there have been recent court rulings,
Yep.
obviously blocking his efforts to deploy the National Guard to ostensibly fight crime. And
Right.
really, it's because, you know, I thought it was interesting that governors are saying, please protest peacefully, because they're using that as
A
to
pretext.
predicate,
Yeah.
right, as a pretext for deploying the National Guard. And then so tell us a little bit about what you're witnessing vis-a-vis the National Guard, and why Trump, I guess he's invoking the Insurrection Act as a way to get around these court rulings, because they're federal judges are saying you can't do this, but so far he's ignoring them, right?
That's what the sort of the theory of the case is that if he continues to be pushed back in the courts about these deployments of the Guard troops, um, then he will invoke the Insurrection Act. And let me just tell you, there's no insurrection on the streets of Chicago. There's no insurrection on the streets of Los Angeles. Um, it's just not happening. And why J.B. Pritzker says it's a pretext, it's sort of the same thing that we saw. It's not sort of, it is deja vu. It's the same exact thing that we saw here in LA. They take small images, use them to justify the deployment of the guards, or in the case of the Marines in LA, that branch of the military. And then their presence provokes clashes. And I'm not saying nobody's condoning clashing with these folks. And I think everyone should understand also, I don't think the military, the people I've talked to, don't want to be there.
Oops. Sorry, you must
They're
be getting a
standing.
call.
Yeah, there we go. The National Guard troops stand face to face with the communities that they're being asked to that they're come from. You know, it's putting them in this awful position. Frankly, I think it's extremely disrespectful to the members of the military to put them in a
Well, they're
position like
supposed to
this
be posse comitatus, right? The law that says that the military should not be involved
on U.S.
in
soil.
right?
Yeah, domestic
And,
policing, exactly. But and I think that they believe that the presence of these folks militarized. Also, you don't even need the National Guard or the Marines. They've got these Border Patrol tactical agents that I've seen operate in the field, go on out in the middle of the night in the Arizona desert with BORTAC, the elite force, and BORSTAR, the rescue force, on the streets of these cities in this gear that dressed up like military with masks covering their face, marching up and down Michigan Avenue in Chicago. What are they doing? What is the point other than to provoke?
well, I want to ask you about some of these people who are just being whisked away.
Yeah.
I sent you a text from my daughter, who was giving me examples of all these people, and I actually sent you the text, and they're just being disappeared in many cases, right?
Yes, I
So
think that
what is happening to these people, Jacob?
I'll give you one example. And thank you for sharing that text from your daughter too, because if you see one example like that, you're gonna you know that there's many more out there.
Here, I'm just going to read what she told
Please
me.
do. Yeah, go ahead.
And 15-year-olds detained by ICE while riding bikes in their neighborhood because they don't have ID. A 16-year-old nonverbal boy with autism disappeared and found in ICE custody. A woman going to a green card appointment, I saw this video, with her husband, an attorney, is told they need to go make a photocopy of her passport. She's separated from them
Yeah, that
and
was
then
here in LA.
detained.
Yeah, I spoke to that husband. Yeah.
I just wanted to share those, but there's story after story like this, and
Countless.
and and what is happening to these people?
I'll give you one example to me that sort of will be, I think, an enduring story for me that I'll think about for the rest of my life is that there's a young woman named Nori Santai Ramos who was an ascending high school senior here in LA at the Miguel Contreras
Right.
Learning Complex. And her mom, Estella, had gone for these routine immigration check-ins in LA the entire time that she had been here in the United States. I think the better part of like almost 2 decades, or maybe just over a decade and a half. And she was asked to bring Nori this time for some reason. And Nori came here with her mom, so they were both undocumented when Nori was a little girl. And they got deported at that hearing. And they got sent back to Guatemala to a place they fled violence from where Nori had never been in as a grown up, or not even a grown up, but somebody who has the intellectual capability of a teenager going on adulthood. We went down there about a month after to meet with Nori because she was a high school star student, track star, athlete, all this stuff. And all she wanted to do was continue to take her classes online. And we met with Nori, we met with Estella, and we came back to the US. And 2 weeks later, Estella died.
She
Nori,
had a heart attack, right?
yep, stranded in Guatemala by herself without anybody or anything she knew. And um, now we don't know what she's going to do, if she's ever going to be able to make it back here. And for what crime? For what crime? For the crime of showing up to do the right thing at her mother's immigration hearing and try to play by the rules. And if there's one Nori, uh, there's many more, just like you're saying about these other stories. And I've been in touch with Nori, um, and I've been in touch with many of the other people that I've come into contact with over the course of this. And the theme that continues to emerge is they say they're going after the worst of the worst, but they're going after almost anything and anyone but. Do I think that they've captured or come into contact with or had some targeted operations for violent criminal offenders? Yeah, I do. But I think 70% of people in ICE custody, we reported, have no criminal record whatsoever right now.
They're
And
just
so,
indiscriminately, like, doing these sweeps, and they're racially profiling people too, aren't they, Jacob?
yeah, there's no doubt about it. And I just think anybody who um, has any, it's not just a moral compass, but anybody who wants to report the facts as they are. I went to Chicago. I went to Cicero. It's the most Latino neighborhood in Illinois. 90% of the people are Hispanic there. And these agents are just driving around in unmarked cars, stopping people randomly and getting out of the car and literally chasing people into a bakery with such little time. The guys leave their coffee cup sitting on the trash can and never, I mean, that was the last probably freedom they'll have in the United States. Um, it's it's family separation by another name. It's what we always said it was going to be. And it wasn't until the images of family separation, the audio from that ProPublica Border Patrol agent saying to the kids crying, "Oh, we have an orchestra here," leaked, that Donald Trump reversed the policy and said, "I don't like the sight or the feeling of the families being separated." That was in 2018. And it wasn't because he was morally opposed to it. It's because the images that were
It was
coming
bad
out
PR for him. But
and
nobody seems to, I mean, listen, I can't count the number of images I've seen describing, like, that WGN producer who was
yep,
basically covering what was happening in Chicago. That's a local Chicago TV station. And she was just thrown to the ground. Her pants were kind of pulled off. They threw her in. It was like they were trying to be Starsky and Hutch. They peeled off. They hit another car in the process. I mean, it was crazy. And I'd love, I don't know if you had a chance to talk to her,
I
Jacob.
haven't spoken to her, but what I said, I was talking to my colleague Nicole Wallace about this yesterday, and I said, what I think is happening now is that what I'm seeing is actually people starting to notice, and it's not just actually the people who are um, all about the humanity of immigrants and pro-immigration, but people who believe that our democracy is starting to fray and fracture with these federalized troops on the streets. It's not your same protests of the normal, ordinary people that I've seen, and that's why I'm really eager to see what happens on
What's
Saturday.
that?
It's also people who are sticking up for members of the military. Who, how would you like to be 17 or 18 or 19 years old, signing up for the National Guard, and watching the news today and realizing you're not getting deployed overseas, you're getting deployed to your friend's neighborhood in order to patrol and terrorize, because that's what the point of all of this is, is to send. Even Greg Bavino, who runs the Border Patrol operations in these cities, has said these are shows of force. I'm paraphrasing. I don't know exactly the words he used, but they're doing it to send a message, not to actually do anything tactical, but to scare people into running away. And I think people are waking up to the fact that this coming to a city near you. If you think it's far away in LA or Chicago, um, just wait till it comes to your town, because that's what they want to do, and they've got $75 billion to do it, and that's when I think the country is going to wake up, and they're waking up.
Hopefully, hopefully. Jacob, thank you for doing this. I really appreciate it. Let's do it again.
Anytime.
I just appreciate someone who's on the ground covering the story, really sharing what's happening because as you said, it's being used for propaganda purposes. People are using old video and saying it's downtown Portland and it's not.
Yep.
And it's really important to get true, accurate information by a respected reporter like you. So thank you.
Thanks, Katie. Thank you for, I know how closely you're following all this stuff, so I really appreciate it. And thanks for inviting me on.
Okay, let's do it again soon. I've got
Anytime.
one final guest. All right, go finish what you're doing. I know you're
Okay,
busy.
I'll see you later.
Thanks, Jacob. Bye.
Bye, Katie.
All right, my final guest, everyone, is Brian Stelter because Brian and I are going to talk about this crazy Pentagon policy that they tried to put into place. Hold on, let me find Brian. It's ST. Oh, I always do that wrong. Sorry. Stelter. There we go. And Brian's just going to kind of get us up to date on this Pentagon policy that made reporters sign this pledge that they would get any information they were reporting on approved by the Pentagon, even unclassified material. It was so insane, you guys, as somebody who was a Pentagon correspondent. They were also limiting where you could walk in the Pentagon. And finally, hey, Brian, how you doing?
Hi, I'm well. How are you?
I'm good. We're walking and talking. I like it.
I'm walking around the halls of CNN trying to find a nice quiet room. I think I'll go in here and talk.
Okay, great. I was just telling everyone watching that, but we're going to talk about a couple things. But finally, these networks grew a pair, and they basically said, "No, Pentagon, no, Pete Hegseth. We are not going to sign this pledge, saying that we're only going to report stuff you approve." Such an asinine, obnoxious, insulting, request on behalf of journalists covering the Pentagon, also restricting their movement around the Pentagon. So there, you're good. So tell us, even Fox News, thank you, Robin, even Fox News finally signed it. I think everyone but OAN, One American News, which is, right of Fox News, signed this letter saying, basically pound sand, Pete Hegseth. We're not signing this. So talk about that and, some of the conversations that you can share with us that were going on at these networks and at CNN and well, CNN's a network, but all these places who were faced with this request, insane request.
Yes. And, a request that really, only had one route. There, it's kind of like, it was really a mandate disguised as a request. It was an order disguised as a request because the Pentagon ultimately controls access to the building. So they can require people to hand in their badges. And that is what has happened today. But I think this is a really kind of special moment, Katie, because it's the biggest show of solidarity we've seen from the American news media all year long.
About effing time, Brian. What took them so long? I think they should have immediately said, this is outrageous. There's no way. And I know a lot of people handed in their credentials as a show of solidarity with these networks. But I'm sorry to interrupt. Why do you think it's such an important moment, even if, in my opinion, it's late?
Well, because it is the first time, you had all the big five networks, NBC and CBS, ABC, Fox, and CNN all putting out a joint statement. You had dozens of outlets refusing to sign the paperwork. And, I think a lot of people have been waiting, wanting things like this to happen, wanting to see shows of solidarity by places that are usually rivals. But, as you know, even better than I, normally these networks are big rivals. Normally, the Washington Post wants to beat the New York Times. It is so uncomfortable normally to come together and take a stand. But frankly, in this case, it had a lot to do with the lawyers. It was media lawyers and newsroom leaders saying this paperwork would put journalists at risk of prosecution, or at least could. This paperwork criminalizes journalism. So in some ways, it was, let's give credit to the lawyers behind the scenes who said, we need to defend our rights. And if you sign away your rights, you're not going to get them back.
Yeah, and it would criminalize them in that if they signed it and then reported something that wasn't approved by the chain of command or by Pete Hegseth and his cronies, then legal action could be taken. But I mean, I can't imagine ever signing that, Brian. I mean, and now tell me also about limiting sort of where you could, somebody who covered the Pentagon, he used to walk around the E-ring
Yeah, I
constantly
remember.
trying to get scoops. They were also saying like you couldn't freely have access to much of the Pentagon, right?
That's right. And that was already starting earlier this year. I mean, I think that's the context we need for this week's news. Pete Hegseth started the year by kicking out CNN and NBC and a bunch of other news outlets from their long-time workspaces. The little booths where reporters, where you were going live. Did you have that booth in the early 90s? You did, right? Yeah.
Yeah, and I was
Yeah.
with Fred Francis, and we were right
Yeah.
next to David Martin, who's
Wow.
like a veteran. I don't even know if David's still there. I've been dying to talk to him about
I think
this.
he's like semi-retired, but he's still at it. All those little booths. Hexa started kicking reporters out under the guise of bringing in new voices. Again, it's like an order disguised as a request. They pretended like they were bringing in new outlets that wanted to have a chance. But, they brought in One American News, which is a small, mostly opinion-driven pro-Trump channel that, has no real news division. And by the way, when OAN hired a Pentagon reporter to fill that new spot, she got fired a few months later because she tried to tell the truth about what was going on with Hegseth. So anyway, Hegseth starts the year by kicking out reporters from their workspace. Then he bans them from walking a lot of the hallways you used to walk. And now he comes up with this paperwork thing in order to get everybody to leave. And so in some ways, this is what he wants, right? He does not want the press inside the building. He does not want the press talking to sources. In the short term, he's getting what he wants. But I do think it's going to backfire on him, don't you?
Yeah, I mean, so basically they're saying they're not going to cover the Pentagon. Is that the latest sort of statement? It's at a standoff, and all these other 30 news organizations and all
Yeah.
declined to sign this pledge. So are
Right.
they just saying, sorry, we're not going to cover you?
The opposite. I would say these news outlets are vowing to cover the Pentagon, but just from outside the walls. And that's, I think, in some ways going to be
That's not
better.
easy to do, though.
True. It's not easy, but I think in some ways it's going to be better. Access is overrated when the defense secretary is openly hostile to the press, when his aides are not having briefings, when journalists are barred from walking down certain hallways, when there's a clear climate of hostility toward the media. At that point, you're probably better off being on the outside and relying on sources and tipsters and getting information from other directions. So that's what we're going to see now. Today at 5 p.m., everybody had to turn in their badges. Dozens of reporters walked out with their boxes of belongings, their carting out gear and all of that. One American News is the only outlet that we know of that decided to stay.
Which is pretty much a propaganda arm of the White House.
Yeah, I do use the word propaganda for it because they're not out there breaking stories of public interest. They're out there promoting Trump's talking points. And so they decided to stay. I've seen a couple other right-wing sites say today they might start to move in. But I think most viewers and readers can tell when they're getting served that kind of PR propaganda. And as for the CNNs and the Reuters and the APs and the New York Times, you just log on to the homepages. You'll see what Pentagon coverage looks like from outside the Pentagon. I think every day we're seeing scoops from the Washington Post and CNN and NBC and others relying on sources without having to be inside the building.
No, I think you're right, but I think it's less about the response by these news organizations, Brian, and more about what the Pentagon and Pete Hegseth, what they were trying to do in
Yes.
terms of stifle the press, in terms of manipulating the press, cutting off access for the press, controlling the press, right? Controlling the narrative and the message. And that to me is even more frightening than covering what's happening inside the Pentagon from outside the
Yes.
walls, as you say. And we saw that with the AP where they wouldn't call it the Gulf of America. They got kicked out of the White House press pool for a while. And we're seeing a lot of this. Obviously, we can talk about ABC with George and CBS with the Skydance deal and the merger with Paramount. And it's pretty much basically blackmail and trying to get positive coverage. And if not, it's the same thing they're doing at the universities. I mean, they're basically holding these institutions hostage, which is really scary. And I just hope the media and all these news organizations uh, stand strong. What do you think? Before we go, well, do you have any other scoops for me? By the way, Brian writes a great newsletter that's must reading for any person interested in the media or journalism called Reliable Sources.
Yeah.
I know that they fired a lot of people I mean, there are cutbacks kind of happening everywhere. NBC today, can you tell us anything about that? I just read that they might do it. I don't know if it happened.
Yeah, they were layoffs at NBC today. Rumors about layoffs coming to CBS under the new ownership. Unfortunately, I've grown accustomed to this idea of media winter, Katie. As soon as it starts to get a little cool outside, that these major media companies, at least a lot of them, are going to go through this season of layoffs, which unfortunately always seem like they're coming toward the end of the year, right before the holidays. Maybe there are financial reasons for that, but we're seeing another round of those now. What we don't often read about, though, are these news outlets hiring in new jobs in new departments. And they don't do it all at once, so it doesn't get headlines. And by no means am I trying to let these places off the hook when it comes to the layoffs. But it is worth recognizing all of these big old-fashioned media brands are urgently trying to reshape themselves to look more like this, right? To do more of what you're doing right now. So I think that's a big part of the story on my beat. Yes, there are these awful cuts that keep happening, and we're losing a lot of institutional knowledge, but we're also seeing a lot of the ABCs of the world try to turn into Substack. And, that melding of those two worlds, I think, is really interesting, and exciting in
It's
some ways.
interesting, yeah, but it's. I mean, it's also, I think, a sign that so many of these organizations were just too late to the game. They didn't have any kind of vision or foresight. Didn't take a rocket scientist, Brian, to see that linear television news was on the decline and that people were slowly but surely increasingly getting their news on digital platforms. I mean, I tried to get CBS to lean into digital in 2008. And
Well,
the number
right
two guy
about
made fun of me for
yeah.
being on Twitter. He said, I think it's beneath the anchor of the CBS Evening News to be on the Twitter. And so I think it was also a combination of older people running these organizations. They're
Yes.
kind of at the pinnacle. They're holding on to the status quo because, when you make these transitions, and you're kind of straddling these two worlds, you have to do it extremely carefully. But I am gobsmacked by how slow they were to
Mm.
recognize how essential it was to, I mean, even CNN, no offense, but to really, move into more digital products and to really embrace. I guess there's always a fear of cannibalizing and decreasing viewers if they can get it on their phones or anytime they're going to not be inclined to turn on live CNN news. But I don't know. I just think it's crazy. Sorry, I'll get off my soapbox now.
I
I
love your
want,
I love your soapbox because you perceive it. You have the advantage of having been on the inside and on the outside. That's what I mean. That's what you bring. You know what it was like inside these places, how they become so what's the word I'm looking for? There's a real
stagnant,
yes,
and
that is
they're like
exactly it.
petrified wood, and then insulated, and they kind of become, so enamored with their own kind of view of themselves, and so self-important that they are too busy, and also it's so political that they calcified. That's a good word, Trisha.
That's
I like
good.
that too. um, but no, it's just crazy to me. But anyway, before we go, because I don't want to keep you too long, I missed Zoran Mamdani's appearance on Fox News. I'm assuming you were watching it, and I'd wonder
Yes.
if you could give us the highlights. Additionally, by the way, Andrew Ross Sorkin wrote in Deal Book today that Zoran Mondani is meeting with a lot of corporate leaders, bankers,
Yeah.
etc., and they're starting to accept and try to figure out how they can work with him. And I talked to one person very high up in banking last night, and I was told they were very impressed by him, which I think is really interesting. So maybe they see the writing on the wall, as Andrew Ross Sorkin said. They want to be able to work with the incoming mayor. But tell us about his appearance on Fox.
Right. He's in some ways he's the mayor in waiting, even though Cuomo would take offense to that idea. And frankly, I think he charmed Martha McCallum, the Fox anchor, the same way that he has charmed so many of those elites that he has been talking with in banking and other sectors. This was not as contentious as an interview as Kamala Harris had with Brett Baer last fall, though there were some similarities between the dynamic of the Democrat going into the Fox den. I think it was very smart of him because he is the new boogeyman of Fox. Fox talks about him constantly, almost
And
always
of the White House,
negatively.
too, Brian. Sorry.
Yes.
Yeah.
No, and that's the smartest, most interesting moment from Mamdani today. People can find it on my Blue Sky and X and watch the clip. He looked into the camera, he talked straight to Trump, and he said, he basically in 45 seconds, he got his entire message out, right? Saying, I'm not going to be like Mayor Adams, calling you to stay out of jail. I won't be like Cuomo, calling you out how to win this election. I am going to call you to talk about how to lower the cost of living. So he was very effective looking straight into the camera. And I think it proves that what we're seeing from this new younger generation of Democrats is a level of media mastery that we just haven't seen from older politicians. You and I, we've all talked for years now about Donald Trump mastering the media, manipulating the media. Well, we're starting to see some people in the other party do the same thing.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think he has been incredibly adept. First of all, I think he's just has a very charismatic presence, whether you agree with him or not. And he has been extremely adept at using social media, getting out there, talking to people. And I think that's why he's doing so well with young people. And he's also addressing affordability. I mean, many of my friends have a lot of issues with him, and they do not want him to become mayor. But I think he's really striking the issue of New York not being affordable for people. So many families with kids, Brian, are moving out of the city because they simply cannot afford to raise a family here. And I think it has been striking a real chord. I'm trying to get him to do my podcast, and I've been chasing them around. So hopefully that's going to happen next week. And by announcing that, I'm putting a little public pressure on them. But
Good. That's great. I love that.
But anyway, Brian, it's
That's
always
perfect.
great to talk to you. Thank you for spending some time with me on Substack. This is sort of the wave of the future. You need to get on this platform, mister.
Thank you. I'm gonna put the URL for my old fashioned newsletter in the channel. But you're right. I agree with you. I'm glad to have those Substack subscribers. To anybody who subscribed to me, someday I will start actually typing. Okay, I'll start
No,
using.
it's really fun because you can do things at the last minute. You can do
Yeah.
things, plan things. You have a lot of flexibility, and I feel like the Substack audience is very engaged and interested, and it's just kind of a more relaxed conversational setting. But that
Yeah.
is, yeah, they're smart too. Yes, they are smart,
It's kind of like what it is. NBC is going to try to become Substack before Substack becomes NBC. That's the story of my beat that I'm enjoying covering. But anyway, great to
Okay,
see you.
well,
Thanks.
we'll see what happens. Anyway, thanks a lot, Brian, and Thank you. You can go do your thing. I'm going to say goodbye.
Okay.
Katie.
I'm going to a free press dinner, so I'm going to go raise some money. See y'all later.
Interesting. Okay. All right. See you later. Bye. Okay, everyone. So, whoa, what just happened? I just removed. Yeah, I'm getting the hang of this still, you guys. Thank you for watching. Thank you for your smart questions and comments. I really enjoy having these conversations. I hope you all find them helpful. Someone asked if I could interview Chris Krebs about what's happening with voting machines, with Dominion voting machines, and how they've been purchased by this Trump supporter and what that means. I mean, there's so much going on in the news. It's really hard to keep up with everything. But our team is small but mighty, and we're trying really hard. And speaking of our team, if you all have any interest or might be willing to become paid subscribers, I think it's $7 a month. I always say it takes a village, quote Hillary Clinton, to book these people. We do a lot of research. We try to produce these. So I ask intelligent questions as much as I can. And we also have newsletter writers and editors and all kinds of people on our team. So we're trying to honestly make this a really useful revenue source. So if anybody would be interested, we would be grateful. And meanwhile, I'm doing an after show for subscribers. See, you get me, Katie, after hours for paid subscribers. And so I'm going to do that next. If any of you all want to stay on. And by the way, thank you, Robin. She says it's a bargain, so worth it. Thank you, Robin. But if you all are interested in me talking to people, like someone suggested on Substack to reach out to Chris Krebs, I texted him this afternoon. I was on a disinformation commission with him at the Aspen Institute. He's an incredibly nice guy, incredibly smart. I'm going to see if he can have a conversation. But if there's somebody out there and you all, want to hear from them, please let me know, because I can't guarantee that they'll talk to me on Substack, but I do have the advantage of knowing some of these folks, or at least professionally, and I think they trust that I'll do a fair interview. Well, most of them, right? Anyway, most of them trust I can do a fair interview. I can do a fair interview. So why don't you guys hang in there if you guys want to stay paid subscribers. Adriana.
We're gonna end this and start a new one for paid subs.
Okay, we're going to end this. Adriana, say hi to everyone. That's Adriana. Alyssa, you want to say hi to everyone? This is Alyssa. Courtney is on the floor. Courtney is my go-to person who helps me so much with very dense and complicated interviews. And I'm so grateful for all of these folks. So, and
More on
Julie.
that in the after show.
Okay, yeah, more. Okay. Bye, everybody. Thank you. Bye.